In 1933, a Tennessee mother fed her family of 7 on $2.50 a week. Her secret was a recipe she would never write down, because by 1955, the government had quietly made it illegal to sell. Today, food inspectors would shut her kitchen down within an hour. Number 17 on this list is now banned by the FDA over a microbial concern she had never heard of. Number 4 contains an ingredient that was outlawed in 43 states by the 1990s. And number 1, the dish that kept more American families alive during the Great Depression than any government program ever did, would land you a fine in most modern grocery stores. These 25 recipes were so cheap, so resourceful, and so independent of the food industry that regulators spent decades quietly burying them. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 illegal Depression-era recipes the government hopes Americans never cook again. Number 25, Hoover Stew. Named after the president most blamed for the collapse, Hoover Stew was what shantytown families ate in the Hoovervilles that sprouted up across America in 1932. A handful of cheap hot dogs sliced into coins, a box of elbow macaroni, a can of tomatoes, a can of corn, and whatever beans happened to be in the cupboard, all simmered together in one pot until the macaroni softened and the broth turned thick and red. That was supper for 10 people. The hot dogs cost about a nickel a pound at the slaughterhouse loading dock, leftover scraps no one else wanted. The whole pot fed a family for a quarter. Today you cannot legally serve this from a food cart, a soup kitchen, or a charity event in most American cities without a commercial kitchen permit, a food handler's license, and a county health inspection. The dish that fed millions during the worst years in American history would now require thousands of dollars in licensing to give away for free. Number 24, dandelion salad with hot bacon dressing. Every front yard in America during the Depression was a potential dinner. Dandelion greens, picked young in early spring before the flowers opened, were torn into a bowl and dressed with hot bacon grease, a splash of cider vinegar, and a pinch of sugar. The bitter leaves wilted slightly under the warm fat, softening into something almost peppery and rich. A pound of dandelion greens cost nothing. They grew wild in the cracks of every sidewalk and along every fence row in America. Mothers sent children out with paper sacks to harvest them after school. Today, gathering wild greens from public parks, state lands, or any property you do not own is restricted in most states, classified as foraging on protected land or theft of vegetation. The greens themselves are still there. We just made it a crime to eat them. A free, nutrient-dense meal that fed Americans for 100 years has been quietly criminalized. Number 23, mock apple pie. This one sounds impossible. During the Depression, when apples were too expensive and the orchards were too far, a recipe began circulating in newspapers and on the back of cracker boxes that produced a pie filling indistinguishable from the real thing, using nothing but Ritz crackers, sugar, water, lemon juice, and cinnamon. The crackers, broken up and simmered in the spiced syrup, swelled and softened into something that had the exact texture of cooked apple slices. The lemon provided the tartness. The cinnamon provided the rest. Bakers swore that if you served it without telling anyone, no one could identify the missing fruit. A box of Ritz cost a dime. A pound of apples cost twice as much. Today, try selling a slice at a farmer's market or a school bake sale. Without commercial kitchen certification, allergen labeling, and proper packaging disclosures, it is illegal to sell. The Depression housewife who fed her neighbors a slice for a nickel would now face a citation. Number 22, lard sandwiches. In coal mining towns across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania, this was the lunch pail standard. 2 slices of white bread, a thick layer of pure rendered pork, lard spread to the edges, a pinch of salt, and sometimes a few rings of raw onion. That was lunch for the men who went down into the mines at 5 in the morning and came back up at 6 at night. Lard cost about 8 cents a pound at the company store. Bread was a nickel. The whole sandwich came in under a penny per serving and delivered nearly 600 calories of slow-burning fuel. Today, public schools cannot serve this lunch under any federal nutrition guideline. The USDA school lunch program would reject it within seconds. The saturated fat counts, the missing vegetables, the absent fiber, every modern regulation conspires against the meal that powered American industrial labor for 50 years. Recent nutrition science has begun walking back its position on animal fats, but the regulations have not caught up. Number 21, squirrel and dumplings. Sunday dinner across the rural South in 1934 often came down out of a tree. 2 or 3 squirrels shot that morning with a .22 caliber rifle, skinned and dressed by noon, simmered in a pot with onions and salt until the meat fell off the tiny bones. Then the dumplings went in, dropped from a spoon, swelling into pale clouds that absorbed the rich, gamey broth. A box of shotgun shells cost about $1 and lasted a hunting family 3 months. The squirrels were free. The flour came from a 25-pound sack that fed the household for weeks. This single pot fed 8 people for the cost of a single bullet. Today, the commercial sale of squirrel meat is banned in nearly every state. You cannot buy it at a butcher. You cannot serve it at a restaurant. Wild game meat sales are heavily restricted under federal wildlife laws, even though the squirrels are still in the trees. A meal that filled 1,000 church potlucks across Appalachia has been removed from the legal food supply. Number 20, possum and sweet potatoes. In rural Georgia and Alabama, when a hunter brought a possum back to the house, supper was already half made. The animal was scalded, scraped, and roasted in a Dutch oven over coals with sweet potatoes piled around it. The fat from the possum, and there was a lot of it, basted the potatoes as the meat cooked, leaving them caramelized, sticky, and rich. The meat itself was dark, slightly sweet, and tasted faintly of the persimmons the animal had been eating. Eleanor Roosevelt was photographed eating possum at a Warm Springs dinner in 1933, and the recipe appeared in Depression-era farm journals from coast to coast. Today, possum can no longer be legally sold for human consumption in most states under modern wildlife trafficking laws. The dish that the First Lady ate at a public banquet in 1933 cannot legally be served at a restaurant in 2025. Nothing about the possum changed. The paperwork around it did. Number 19, vinegar pie. When fresh fruit was out of reach, mothers in the rural Midwest made pie from what was already in the cupboard. White sugar, flour, eggs, butter, a half cup of apple cider vinegar, and a teaspoon of vanilla, beaten together and poured into a pastry shell, then baked until the top set golden brown. The vinegar, against all reason, mellowed into something that tasted almost exactly like lemon, bright and tart and clean. A pie cost about 12 cents to make and fed 8 people. Today, this pie is technically legal to bake at home, but the moment you try to sell it, you run headlong into cottage food laws that vary from state to state. In some places, it must be tested for acidity and labeled with a pH disclosure. In others, it cannot be sold at all because it contains uncooked egg compound by federal standards. A pie your great-grandmother made for the church bazaar would now require a chemistry report. Here is where things start getting personal. The truth nobody talks about is that most of these recipes did not become illegal because they were dangerous. They became illegal because they were too cheap. A family that knows how to render lard, can their own meat, forage their own greens, and bake their own bread does not need to buy much at the grocery store. They do not generate tax revenue. They do not buy brand name food. They do not pay processors and middlemen. The American food economy was built on the assumption that you would not do any of this yourself. So the regulations followed: license this, inspect that, restrict the other. And one by one, the meals that made our grandparents independent became things you needed permission to cook. Number 18, salt-rising bread. This bread is the strangest thing in this entire list. It does not use yeast. It does not use sourdough starter. It uses a fermented mixture of cornmeal, milk, and warm water that grows a specific bacterium overnight. The same bacterium, in fact, that the FDA classifies as a potential pathogen in modern food safety regulation. The bread that comes out is pale, dense, and faintly cheesy, with a tangy, almost sulfurous flavor that no other bread on earth can match. It was the daily bread of the Appalachian Mountains for 2 centuries before commercial yeast became widely available in the 1920s. Today, you cannot legally produce salt-rising bread in any commercial bakery in the United States without a special variance. The bacterium it grows, while completely harmless when fully baked, fails routine food safety inspection by the millions of colony-forming units in its starter stage. A bread that fed 3 generations of mountain families is now functionally banned from the commercial food supply. Number 17, home canned meat. In 1935, before refrigeration reached most rural farms, a single hog provided meat for an entire winter through home canning. The fresh pork was cut into chunks, packed raw into glass jars with salt, and processed in a pressure canner for 90 minutes at 15 pounds of pressure. When done correctly, the jars sealed, and the meat lasted on a pantry shelf for 2 years. A hog cost about $10 in 1935 and produced 60 quarts of canned meat. The math fed a family through a Depression winter for less than the price of a modern week of groceries. Today, the FDA strongly discourages home pressure canning of meats and outright prohibits the sale of any home canned meat product whatsoever, citing botulism risk. The technique that kept rural America alive is now flagged as one of the highest risk food preparations a person can attempt. Done correctly, it is safe. Done incorrectly, it can kill you. The government simply decided to remove the choice. Number 16, souse meat. When a family slaughtered a hog in November, the head went into the pot. Souse, also called head cheese, was made by boiling the entire hog's head in a stock pot with vinegar, sage, and black pepper for 6 hours, until every shred of meat fell from the bone. The meat was picked clean, mixed with the gelatin-rich broth, packed into a loaf pan, and chilled overnight. By morning, it had set into a sliceable, tangy, almost terrine-like loaf that families ate cold on bread for weeks afterward. A whole hog's head was thrown in for free at most rural butchers because nobody else wanted it. Today, USDA processing regulations make it nearly impossible to legally sell souse meat at retail. The processing temperatures, holding times, and inspection requirements for ready-to-eat meat products with this level of organ involvement are nearly impossible to meet in a small operation. Souse exists in a few specialty southern markets, but the version your grandmother made is no longer commercially legal. Number 15, fried brain sandwiches. In St. Louis, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis, the fried brain sandwich was a working man's lunch from the 1880s through the 1980s. A whole calf brain was soaked in salt water to firm up, dredged in flour and cornmeal, fried in lard until golden, and served on a hamburger bun with mustard and pickles. The texture was almost custardy, the flavor mild and rich. A brain cost a nickel at the butcher counter because almost no one else wanted it. Today, the sale of bovine brain for human consumption from cattle over 30 months old is banned by the FDA under regulations passed in response to the bovine spongiform encephalopathy crisis of the 1990s. The brain sandwich, once available at hundreds of taverns across the Midwest, has nearly vanished from the legal food supply. A handful of restaurants still serve it using younger calves, but the casual lunch counter version your great-grandfather ate is functionally extinct under federal law. Liver mush was the breakfast that fueled the textile mills in western North Carolina. Pork liver, pork head meat, and cornmeal were ground together, seasoned with sage and black pepper, packed into loaf pans, and steamed until firm. The next morning, slices were fried in a cast-iron skillet until the outside crisped into a deep mahogany shell while the inside stayed soft, and served with grits and biscuits. A pound of liver mush cost about 15 cents in 1939 and fed a family 2 breakfasts. Today, only 3 small producers in North Carolina still manufacture it commercially, and federal labeling requirements have grown so strict that no new producer has entered the market in over 30 years. The product remains legal, but the regulatory burden of getting a new liver mush operation, USDA certified, is so high that the recipe is functionally locked away from any new generation of producers. Here is the second pattern break, and it is the one that will make you angry. Every dish so far has something in common. They all use the parts of the animal that modern American consumers refuse to eat. The brain, the liver, the head, the feet. During the Depression, a hog fed a family for a year because nothing was wasted. A modern hog feeds a family for maybe 4 months because we throw away 40% of it. The food industry profits from this waste. They make more money selling lean ground pork at premium prices than they ever could selling souse meat at 15 cents a pound. The regulations followed the profits. The most nutritious, cheapest parts of the animal got buried in paperwork until they disappeared from American kitchens. Your great-grandmother ate the whole animal. We eat the expensive parts and pay the difference forever. Number 13, mock duck. When a family could not afford an actual duck, they made one out of flank steak. A thin piece of beef was pounded flat, layered with bread stuffing, sage, and onion, rolled tight, tied with kitchen string, and roasted in a hot oven until the outside browned and the inside stayed tender. Carved across the grain, the slices looked remarkably like duck breast and tasted savory and rich. Flank steak in 1934 cost about 15 cents a pound, less than a third the price of poultry. Mock duck appeared in Depression-era cookbooks across every region of the country. Today, the recipe itself is perfectly legal to make at home. But try labeling and selling something as mock duck at a deli counter. FDA truth in labeling rules forbid using the name of one animal to market a product made from another, even when everyone understands the name is metaphorical. A century-old American tradition runs straight into modern food packaging law. The pig's foot was the cheapest cut at any butcher counter in 1936, often given away free with a larger purchase. Mothers boiled the feet for 3 hours with onion and bay leaf, packed them into glass jars with vinegar, salt, and pickling spice, and let them sit on a pantry shelf for 2 weeks before opening. The result was a tangy, gelatinous, deeply savory snack that was eaten cold, straight from the jar. A jar of homemade pickled pig's feet cost almost nothing to produce and lasted for months without refrigeration. Today, commercial sale of home-pickled meat products is essentially banned without inspection by the USDA. A jar from your grandmother's pantry, perfectly safe, perfectly delicious, perfectly the same as it was in 1936, cannot legally cross any state line for sale. The few commercial producers still operating use entirely different processes that produce a flatter, more uniform product. The vinegar tang of an actual home-pickled foot has nearly vanished. Salt-cured pork fat, cut into thick slabs and fried until the edges blistered and the centers turned golden and crisp, was the breakfast that powered every sharecropping family in the Deep South. A pound of fatback cost about 8 cents in 1937. 2 slabs and a piece of cornbread fed a grown man through 10 hours of field work. The salt drew out moisture as it cooked, concentrating the pork flavor into something almost meat candy. Children ate the crispy edges as treats. Today, fatback is still legal, but its commercial availability has collapsed because modern hog breeding has produced animals with such lean bodies that the thick fatback layer of the 1930s simply does not exist anymore. Heritage breed hogs that produce traditional fatback are a tiny fraction of the market and require specialty butcher access that most Americans do not have. The cut is not banned by law. It has been banned by the engineering of the modern pig. Number 10. Pigeon pie. In urban tenements across New York, Chicago, and Boston, pigeons were free protein for anyone willing to trap them on a fire escape. 3 or 4 birds, plucked and cleaned, were stewed with carrots and onions until the meat fell from the bones, then poured into a deep dish under a flaky pastry crust and baked until the top turned golden. A pigeon pie fed 6 people for the cost of the flour and butter. The birds themselves, the same birds we now consider pests, were a Depression staple in cities across the eastern seaboard. Today, hunting, trapping, or killing pigeons within most city limits is prohibited under municipal codes that vary city by city. The selling of pigeon meat without USDA inspection is federally banned. A bird that exists by the millions in every American city, eating garbage, can no longer legally feed a hungry family. The pigeons did not change. The laws around them did. Chitlins, the hog's small intestine painstakingly cleaned, scraped, soaked, and boiled with onion, vinegar, and red pepper for hours until it turned tender, was the centerpiece of countless Sunday dinners across the African American South for over a century. A pound of chitlins cost 3 cents in 1938. The smell during cooking was famous, intense, and sour, but the finished dish was rich, chewy, and deeply flavorful. Today, the commercial sale of chitlins faces some of the strictest USDA inspection requirements of any meat product in the country due to documented contamination risks during cleaning. Most major American grocery chains stopped carrying them entirely by the early 2000s. The dish remains legal to prepare at home, but the supply chain that made chitlins affordable and accessible has been almost entirely dismantled by regulation. A meal that defined an entire culinary tradition is now functionally a specialty item, available only to those who know exactly where to look. Third, pattern. Break. Here is what every one of these meals understood and what we have collectively forgotten. The cheapest food on earth is the food that grows wild, the food that comes from the parts no one wants, the food that requires labor instead of money. Every regulation in the modern food system pushes Americans toward the opposite, toward food that arrives in packages, cleaned and processed and inspected and stickered and ready to consume with no skill required. That food is not cheaper. It is more expensive in every sense. More expensive financially, more expensive nutritionally, more expensive in the slow erasure of the knowledge that lets a family feed itself when times get hard. The Depression generation knew how to eat through anything because nothing about their food required someone else's permission. We have lost that. The loss has a price. Number 8, acorn flour bread. Native Americans had been making bread from acorns for 10,000 years before Europeans arrived. During the Depression, that knowledge resurfaced in the rural South and West, when wheat flour became too expensive. White oak acorns were gathered in the fall, shelled and leached in running water for 3 days to remove the bitter tannins. Then they were dried, ground, and mixed with a small amount of cornmeal or wheat flour to form a dense, sweet, nutty bread that tasted faintly of chestnut. A bushel of acorns cost nothing. They fell from oak trees in every state in the country. Today, acorn flour is technically legal but heavily regulated when sold commercially, requiring tannin testing and laboratory certification that puts it out of reach for most small producers. Foraging acorns from public lands is restricted in most states. A free food source that grows abundantly across half of America has been buried under enough paperwork that almost no one bothers to harvest it. Number 7, cattail pollen pancakes. In the swampy lowlands of the rural Midwest and South, the cattail plant fed Depression families through every season. In late spring, the male flower spike produced a bright yellow pollen. It could be shaken into a paper bag by the cupful in 20 minutes of harvesting. Mixed with a little flour, an egg, and milk, it made pancakes the color of a sunset, sweet and slightly nutty and faintly perfumed. The pollen cost nothing. The cattails grew in every ditch and pond from Minnesota to Louisiana. Today, harvesting wild cattail pollen for sale falls under so many overlapping wildlife and wetland regulations that it is functionally impossible to commercialize. Even gathering it for personal use from public wetlands is restricted in most states. A free, protein-rich, abundant food that Native Americans and Depression families relied upon for centuries has been regulated into invisibility. Most modern Americans have walked past $100 of pollen this summer without recognizing it. Every spring in the rural Midwest, the dandelion flowers came up in waves, and Depression-era families turned them into dandelion wine. A gallon of dandelion blossoms, picked clean of stems, was steeped in boiling water with sugar, lemon, orange, and yeast, then sealed in a crock and allowed to ferment for 6 months until it cleared into a pale gold wine that tasted faintly of honey and grass. A gallon of finished wine cost about 30 cents to produce, almost all of it the sugar. It got a family through a winter of celebrations. Today, federal law strictly limits home wine production to 200 gallons per household per year, and selling any of it without a winery license is a federal crime. Even gifting it across state lines technically violates alcohol distribution laws. A skill that nearly every rural mother possessed in 1935 is now hedged by enough federal alcohol regulation that almost no one practices it. In the Mississippi Delta and the Louisiana Bayou, frog legs were a Depression staple. A boy with a flashlight and a gig could bring back 20 bullfrogs from a single night at the pond. The legs were skinned, dredged in seasoned flour, fried in lard until golden, and served with grits or rice. The meat was mild, sweet, almost like a cross between chicken and fish. A night's frogging cost the price of a flashlight battery and produced enough protein for 2 family meals. Today, the commercial sale of wild-caught American frog legs is heavily restricted under state wildlife laws. Most frog legs sold in American grocery stores are now imported from Asian frog farms, often from species that environmentalists have flagged for sustainability concerns. The American boy with his flashlight at the pond would now be poaching. The free dinner he brought home for his mother is now a federally regulated activity. Number 4. Turtle soup. In the Chesapeake Bay and the swamps of Louisiana, turtle soup was the most elegant thing a poor family could put on the table. A snapping turtle caught in a baited trap, butchered carefully and simmered for hours with onion, sherry, and tomato, produced a dark, rich soup that hotels in Philadelphia and New Orleans charged premium prices for. A wild-caught turtle cost nothing. Depression-era families ate it as Sunday dinner, while the wealthy paid $5 a bowl in city restaurants. Today, the commercial harvest of most American turtle species is banned or heavily restricted under both state laws and the federal Lacey Act. Common snapping turtles can still be harvested in some states, but the regulations vary so wildly that selling turtle meat across state lines is a legal minefield. The dish that fed both ends of the Depression-era social spectrum has been quietly banned from the legal food supply almost everywhere it was once made. Number 3. Roadkill stew. This one will sound shocking, but in the rural South and Appalachia, a fresh deer struck by a car on a quiet country road was supper for a week. The carcass was field-dressed within an hour, butchered at home, and turned into a deep, rich stew with potatoes and onions that tasted exactly like a slow-roasted venison shoulder, because that is essentially what it was. Free protein, perfectly legal in 1935 because no law had been written against it. Today, salvaging roadkill is illegal in many American states without specific permits and tags from the state wildlife agency. The meat is wasted instead. Estimates suggest over 1 million deer are killed by vehicles in the United States every year, representing tens of millions of pounds of usable meat. Most of it rots on the side of the road because picking it up violates state law. The Depression family that would have fed itself for a week from a single deer would now face a poaching citation in many states. Number 2. Raw cream butter. Until the federal pasteurization mandates of the 1940s and 1950s, every farm family in America made butter from raw, unpasteurized cream. The cream was skimmed from the top of fresh milk, allowed to ripen at room temperature for a day until it developed a slightly tangy, almost yogurt-like flavor, then churned by hand or with a hand-cranked churn until the butter separated from the buttermilk. The finished product was richer, more complex, and more nutritious than anything sold in a modern grocery store. A pound of homemade butter cost the labor of an hour and the milk from a single cow. Today, the sale of raw milk butter is banned outright in most American states under federal pasteurization laws. The dairy product that built rural America for 200 years is now a black market item, traded through farm share programs and herd share legal workarounds. The butter our great-grandparents ate every morning is functionally illegal in 2025. Number 1. Bean soup with smoked neck bone. At the absolute top of this list is the dish that fed more American families through the Depression than any government program ever did. A pound of dried navy beans soaked overnight, simmered for 4 hours with a smoked pork neck bone, an onion, and a bay leaf, until the beans broke open and the broth turned the color of strong tea, thick with collagen and dissolved starch. A pound of beans cost 6 cents in 1934. The smoked neck bone cost a dime. The whole pot fed a family of 8 for 2 days for under 20 cents. The smoke from the bone perfumed the entire house all afternoon. Children came in from the cold and ate 3 bowls without speaking. The dish kept poor America alive. Today, smoked neck bones are still legal, but they have nearly vanished from American grocery stores because modern processing plants reserve the smoking equipment for higher margin cuts. Most Americans under 50 have never seen one in a butcher case. The single most important Depression-era recipe in this country is not technically illegal. It is something worse. It is forgotten, and the supply chain that supported it has been quietly dismantled. A meal that built a generation of survivors has been replaced by canned soup and frozen dinners that cost 10 times as much and feed half as well. That is the loss nobody talks about. Here is my challenge. Cook one of these this week. The bean soup, the dandelion salad, the mock apple pie, the fried fatback, the squirrel and dumplings, if you know a hunter. Anything from this list. Then come back and tell me whether your great-grandmother was right. Drop the one you are going to try in the comments. I want to know if the Hoover stew gets more love than the vinegar pie. Because these were not just recipes, they were proof that an American family could feed itself on almost nothing. And that is exactly the knowledge somebody, somewhere, decided we no longer needed to have.